Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our next live stream. I'll be your producer for this session. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our presenters to answer live. Our session is being recorded. It will be available to view on demand right here on the Reactor channel. With that, I'd love to turn it over to our speakers for today. Thank you for joining.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Aaron Merrill. I'm a product manager on the OneLake team. I focus specifically on OneLake security, and that'll be our topic that we will be going through today. So we'll start at the beginning. We'll talk a little bit about some of the basics of OneLake security, how it works, and then I'm going to spend some time doing some demos. We'll talk about some of the new features that are available and really show how that works in practice. So if you're not familiar with Microsoft Fabric and OneLake security, Microsoft Fabric is our unified data platform for AI transformation. There's a couple different components that make up Microsoft Fabric. We have an AI-powered data platform, an open and AI-ready data lake, which is Microsoft OneLake, and then it's AI-enabled for business users. It integrates natively in your Office suite, Teams, makes it all available where your business users are actually working. So today we're going to focus on the open and AI-ready data lake, which is OneLake, and then, of course, OneLake security. So what is OneLake? OneLake is a SaaS data lake that unifies all of the world's data. So whether you have data that's on-prem, it's in a cloud, it's in a variety of different clouds, OneLake lets you connect to all of this data in a seamless way, often without creating copies of that data, so you have a single unified view of your entire data estate in a single platform. And one of the key features of this is that it's designed to have no data silos. So OneLake works out of the box with all of our different features inside of Fabric, which we call workloads. So things like Data Factory for moving data, data engineering for running Spark jobs, data warehouse for queries, and of course, Power BI for your business reporting. And so OneLake is the core of all of these different workloads, and this is where all of their data is actually stored. And the key to achieving this is through our separation of compute and storage. So all of these workloads have their own compute layer, and you can mix and match between whichever given workload you want to use for the right task. But they all use the same Delta Parquet data format for actually storing the data that is in OneLake. So this lets you have a single copy of data that can be used across any of these different engines without having to create a duplicate of it. In kind of the traditional platform as a service world, you would purchase a SQL server and you would have Hadoop for your data processing. But in order to use your data with each of these different services, you would actually have to create copies of it to move it here and then move it there. With this architecture, you can have a single copy of data that works across any of these different engines without creating any copies of it. So this is what we call our one copy store. You have one copy of data, it works across all of the different Fabric workloads. The natural extension of this is that you then have a single security layer for all of these copies, or for the single copy of data as well. So instead of having multiple different security layers, often at each particular engine, so SQL Server security or Power BI security, each copy of the data will have a single security definition that works everywhere that data is going to be accessed. And one of the really cool things about OneLake security is that it's not just object level security like you would expect from a data lake. We also do fine-grained access control as well. So you can do row or column level security to really keep that data nice and safe. And so how does this work in practice? Well, we'll go through all of the individual details of how to create roles and what those specific features are. But at a very high level, you have your OneLake data item. This is going to be your lakehouse, could be a mirror database, something like that. And in this, you will create roles that grant users access to different scopes of data. That might be certain tables or certain schemas, or even given rows within some of those tables. So this is where the data owner goes and permissions to govern this access. And these permissions are checked when a user then goes to access the data, regardless of what compute engine they actually use. So as users access this data through different services, maybe Spark or Power BI, they're routed to their correct role in OneLake security, and that is where the data is then filtered, and only the relevant information is shown to those users. And so we have a couple of key principles here around OneLake security. So first, define once and enforced everywhere. So this is really the core principle of OneLake security. Since we have a single copy of data, you should have your single copy of security that works across all of your different engines inside and outside of Fabric. The security lives with the data. So instead of having security stored in a separate catalog or a separate service, OneLake is actually the store of that data security and the store of the data. So you never have to worry about your security getting disconnected from your data. It's all stored in a single location and interconnected. And then enforce permissions safely. This might seem like a little bit of an obvious statement, but we have cases with fine-grained access control where certain services still understand OneLake as a data lake. So when they go to read data, if that service doesn't know how to process that row and column level security, we'll make sure your data is always kept secure. So that might mean giving only the rows that user is allowed to see, or that might mean failing the query if we can't guarantee that data will not be enforced securely. So the goal is pretty simple. Define security once, have it enforced everywhere, regardless of what engine you're using, either inside or outside of Fabric. So let's go ahead and flip over to my browser real quick. We can show just a quick example of how to set up OneLake security. So again, we'll talk about some of these concepts in a little bit more detail, but this is my Northwind workspace. It's for my fictional business here. And I have a whole bunch of data that I have created here inside of Microsoft Fabric. Now, this is my main source of data. This is my Northwind Test Lakehouse. And I have a whole bunch of different tables here. So this is all information about my particular business. So we have customers, employees, the orders, the products, territories, etc. So it's a pretty standard data model. Basically, we've got like a core orders table, and then a whole bunch of different information that enriches that orders table, telling us who the customer is, who the employees are, which orders are placed, the details about those orders, etc. So at the top here, you can see I have this Manage OneLake Security button. So I can click Manage OneLake Security, and this will open up all of the different roles that I have within my Lakehouse. So you can see I only have one role here at the moment, but I'm going to go ahead and create a new role. And it's pretty straightforward. So you give your role a name. We'll call this one Test. And then you choose whether you're going to give either read permission or read-write permissions, which we'll talk more about in detail. Once you give it a name, you then choose what data you want to include in your role. So here I'm going to say, I can say all data, which includes items that will be added in the future. Or I can choose selected data and then browse my Lakehouse to pick the items that I might want to grant access to. So I could grant access to everything in a particular schema, which will then grant all to my objects in the file section of my Lakehouse. So given folders. So for example, I'm going to pick, let's say, the employees table. I can also select the employees table here, go to data access, and then I have the ability to define my row and column level security here. So I can start typing. I can say employees country equals USA. And now I can have can be sure that when any of my users in this role go to access the employees table, they're only going to see USA country. Likewise, I can go to the column security tab, and I can pick certain columns that I want users to be able to see. So for example, the birth date or the address of these employees is sensitive information. So I can go ahead and remove those. And so now when users go to access this data, they won't be able to see those particular columns. So in my little overview page, you can see this role grants access to the employees table, and it has row and column level security applied. Then I can go ahead and grant users access to this. So we will grant some access to this role. Click create, and then the role is created. So I'll come back to the demo to show a little bit more on the access side later, but that's the overall pattern for just defining roles in OneLake security. So it's very straightforward. You set kind of the individual components, and then those users are able to access that data. So let's go back over to the presentation, and we'll walk through the next steps here. So first thing, OneLake security went GA about 2 months ago. So all of the features that we'll talk about are going to be generally available. So table, row, column level security using your favorite query engine. So whether you use Spark, SQL, or Power BI, those are all GA. I'm also going to show the Fabric Graph database today, which also just went GA and supports OneLake security as well. So lots of exciting improvements and updates. Obviously, the general availability means you can go ahead and start deploying this right away in your production environments. So as we showed when I was creating the role in the UX, all of OneLake security is role-based. So the core concept is you create a role and you put users in that role, and that governs what they have access to. If a user is not in a role, that means they're not going to have access to any data. This is what we call deny by default. So out of the box, users don't have permissions, and then you grant them permissions by giving them access to given roles. The roles are composed of three things that we kind of saw in the UI. The first is the permission, so you can choose read or read write. The second is the scope, which is the actual items that you're granting access to. So in the demo, I grabbed the employees table, but again, I can choose multiple tables, I can choose files, I can choose everything in my lake house. And then this can be restricted to rows and columns. And then I granted access to just one member, but these are the users. This can be security groups, or this can be non-people identities like a service principal or an application. Once you then have your role created, there's the different security features that you're actually applying through your role. So the base security type is folder or table level security. This is where you're going to grant access to just everything in that folder or table. Because pretty much everything in OneLake is a folder, that's why these two are kind of combined together. So you can either grant access to the folder and everything inside of that folder, or grant access to the table, and then that means you're granting access to all rows and columns of that particular table. Now, if an item is a table, that means you can also define this row and or column level security on it. So pretty straightforward. Again, row limits what rows the user can see in that particular table when they're querying it. And the column level security controls which columns they're able to see when they're querying that as well. And we'll go through these in a little bit more detail. I'll talk about specific nuances of those features. And so here's kind of an overall view of what OneLake looks like. So OneLake is configured per tenant. And then within that, there are different fabric concepts that are important. So you have workspaces, and workspaces are just places where users can collaborate on given data or different code that they're using to manage that data. So you can see I have workspace 1, I have a workspace 2 here, and then within each workspace, that's where I create my individual items where either data lives or my code artifacts live, like a notebook. So here I have Lake House A, and I've got some tables. So using OneLake security, I can then set up a role to grant access to just specific paths within the overall hierarchy of OneLake. So this user here has permission to see only table 1, and then some rows in table 2. But I haven't given them access to anything in Warehouse A or Lake House C. So this just kind of shows the overall picture of where their permissions fit in. So this is folder and or table level security because they work pretty much the same way. So as you saw when I was creating a role, it's pretty straightforward. Once you've already selected the permission for your role, which was read or read write, you can then just choose which item you want to grant access to. All of our security is designed to be very intuitive to use. So it's based on kind of Windows or SharePoint type access control models. So if you grant access to an item, that grants access to the item and everything inside that item. And this is a recursive inheritance. So if I grant access to the customers folder, I also grant access to the sub-customers folder and the sub-sub-customers folder and any of the data that may be inside that as well. So it's very easy to understand how to actually manage your permissions here for granting access to folders or tables that exist within your lakehouse. Next is column level security. So this allows you to limit what columns users see when they're accessing that data. Anything that you remove or you hide access to, those users won't be able to see the columns when they're querying that data. We actually have a new update for the column level security UX that's rolling out here. So when I go and show it on the live demo, it won't be there quite yet. But this is what it's going to look like. So it'll be very straightforward to understand. You just see all of your columns and then the permission for it, which is either read or hide. So again, if it's hidden, users won't be able to see that particular piece of data. We don't support data masking yet. It's something that we very much want to do. No timelines for data masking, but it's something that we're currently looking at. So yeah, very cool feature here. Really excited about the new UX update that should be available here in a week or two. I have a blog post about that on the Fabric blog website if you want to read more. Next is row level security. So maybe you want to restrict access to particular rows in a table. So we try to make this fairly straightforward. Most people know SQL, or honestly, AI is very good at writing SQL code for you if you're not. And so you can just write a basic SQL statement to limit what rows a user is allowed or not allowed to see. So in this case, I have an RLS predicate. It says where the city key equals this string here. So any rows that do not match this particular statement will just be hidden from the user. So users will only be able to see these particular city key rows. You can make this a little bit more complex as well. You can do ands and ors and in statements to combine different values together to really get the picture of what data you want that user to be able to see. We do not support dynamic or multi-table RLS yet. It is something that is on our roadmaps. If you go to the overall Fabric roadmap page, there's an entry for multi-table and dynamic RLS. So that will let you join to another table in order to determine what rows you want to show the user. But in the G8 product right now, we just have the single table RLS. We also support read-write permission. So you saw this little checkbox in the live demo. So this lets you have a user that has, let's say, basic privileges to Fabric. So we have a couple different workspace roles. I didn't go into it in detail, but you can have privileged users like admins, members, and contributors where they can write items inside of Fabric. So it means they can create lake houses, or they can create notebooks, etc. Then we have viewers, and viewers are read-only. They can consume data, but they're not able to write any data or create any items in Fabric. But with the read-write permission, you can actually have a user that is a viewer, but is given specific permissions to write to just one table or just one folder or something like that. So the idea is you might have users, maybe they need to upload some data to a particular location, but you still want to make sure that they're not creating new items or writing data elsewhere. So you can do that by granting them the read-write permission on those particular items. And this is the phase one. So this just went GA as well. So if you want to use your read-write access for viewers, that is a generally available feature. We're working on a phase two, which will be the ability to restrict access for any user. So whether they're an admin member or contributor, you'll be able to limit the access, what they're able to see, and have that row and column level security apply to them as well. So I don't have any timelines to share on that, but those will that is going to be coming, and that will kind of complete the overall picture of all security for your data can just be managed through OneLake security, whether it's admins or just people who are viewing that data. So next, I want to spend some time talking about shortcuts. So if you're not familiar with what a shortcut is a way in OneLake to point to data that doesn't create a copy of it. So it works just like a shortcut on your desktop, right? You have a document that's in a file somewhere, you create a shortcut to that particular document, and now it appears somewhere else. You didn't create a copy of that document. You just point into it, and now it's available via reference somewhere else. So shortcuts work exactly the same way. So I can have some revenue data that exists in one location inside of OneLake, and I can create a shortcut to it from another location. And I'm looking at the exact same immediately up-to-date view of that data applications for how this works with OneLake security. So the first model we have is called a pass-through shortcut. What this means is that when I set security on the, we call it the producer. So this is the producer side. This is where your data actually lives. And then this is the consumer side. This is where the shortcut is that is pointing again to the producer side. So you have some security set up on the producer. User is able to see. So if the producer says user A can only see rows for the United States of America, that means when they query the shortcut, they will only see rows for the United States of America. They don't have any ability to change the data that they have access to. And in order to see it, they must have access to it on the producer side. This is what we call a pass-through shortcut. It gives for all of the permissions, they give those users access. So these are what we support for OneLake shortcuts. So if you create a shortcut to other data in OneLake, this is the authentication model that is used. We also have a second model that's a little bit more complex. This is called a delegated shortcut. So we still have a producer and a consumer, but now there's an intermediate identity. Generally, it's going to be an application or a service principal that is used on behalf of everybody who's accessing the shortcut. So here you'll notice we have security on both sides. So the way this works is the producer grants the service principal access to some amount of the data here in the producer side. Then the users create a shortcut using this service principal. So now everybody who accesses this shortcut sees whatever the service principal sees. But because it's delegating as this service principal, you can then also set security on the consumer side to restrict access to what the end users see. So you get this kind of composition of security from the producer side and the consumer side, and it takes the most restrictive view between the two of them. So if you look at a concrete example, let's say I have the service principal can only see rows for North America. I can then configure additional security over here that says users. So maybe we'll pick Canada. So now we have more data than what the service principal sees. So the service principal sees North America. So Europe data is out of the question in this case. But the owner of the shortcut has the ability to further restrict the access for those users who are accessing the shortcut. So typically this model was what we use for access to some of our external cloud providers. So if you create a shortcut to an external service like AWS 3 or Google Cloud Storage, this used the type of delegated shortcut model. It's a little bit different in that case because in an external shortcut, the producer is that other cloud service, not OneLake. So you have OneLake over here, and then the external cloud service over here. But we recently just launched the OneLake delegated shortcuts. So you can now use this exact same model here for connecting to other data inside of OneLake. One cool thing about the delegated shortcuts is you can actually do this across tenant as well. So if your organization is a multi-tenant organization, or if you want to share data with a totally different Fabric tenant, maybe there's some other businesses that you work with and you need to share data, you can now do this through cross-tenant delegated shortcuts. So this is really powerful because you control all access to what they can see. You control the permissions on the service principal that's used to access this data. But they are then able to consume that data on their side without making any copies of it, and then leverage that data and then distribute it amongst their business users as they need to. So a really cool feature. It's available now in public preview for both the single tenant or cross-tenant delegated OneLake shortcuts. Yeah, so there is a question that if you have RLS is not supported. Yes, that is correct. So in the example I gave where you have like US or North America and then Canada rows, a subset of the RLS, that is not supported at the moment. We do support subset of column level security or just overall object level security, but we don't support RLS configuration on the producer side at the current point in time. So that's a good call out. But you can definitely do it with either column level security or just grant access to specific tables and let them. So now with these different options, there's a bit of a a discussion point. How do I know what shortcut type I need to use? So the default type is still going to be pass-through. That's going to be a recommendation for most cases. The reason for this is it's the most secure. So if you want to make sure that you have full control and you know everybody who's going to be accessing your data, that's where pass-through shortcuts come into play. You get to choose exactly what those users see and you know who those users are. And the downside of this is, you do manage access to all of your data. So again, you have to specifically manage everybody who's going to see that data. The delegated shortcut is helpful if you don't want to do that management. So you just want to set high-level rules that say, these users can only see North America data or Europe data, something like that. but you don't want those users accessing your lakehouse directly. In this case, you can just grant access to the service principal. They can use a delegated shortcut, and then managing the end users becomes the consumer's problem. So I'll give an example of this in just a second. Obviously, then, if you want to share data with another tenant without creating a copy of it, we only have the delegated mode for cross-tenant shortcuts, so that's the best option. But oftentimes, these different shortcut patterns get chained together. So you might have some data that exists in an existing service. This could be ADLS Gen 2, an S3 account, something like that. And you'll create a delegated external shortcut to bring that data into OneLake. So here's your OneLake. You now have all this revenue data available, again, without creating any copies of it. And then you can set your OneLake security on top of this, this external shortcut to govern what rows, columns, etc. you want users to be able to see. And then this is where you can choose how you want to distribute this to your other users through shortcuts. So in some cases, maybe they'll use notebooks. They'll just create copies of it. But in a lot of cases, you'll just want to have this zero copy method where you're going to be using either a pass-through or a delegated shortcut to distribute this to your other teams. So the kind of the main pattern that we see here is hub and spoke with OneLake pass-through shortcuts. So once you've brought that data into your original lakehouse, you'll configure your OneLake security roles, and then each of the downstream teams that is going to consume this data will have their own workspace, and they'll create these pass-through shortcuts to reference that data directly. So you have full control over who these people are. They're using these pass-through shortcuts, but they have their own workspaces for creating reports. Very commonly, they'll just create semantic models, and it'll end up like a business or reporting layer built over your lakehouse. So this is one option for using the pass-through shortcuts. The other option here is for using delegated shortcuts. And I've kind of taken a very high scale use case because I think it drives the point home. Let's say you have a bunch of different data teams. They're broken up by different regions, and they have a very large number of users. So in this case, we have 10,000 end users here, 10,000 end users here, and 10,000 more end users over here. In order to be able to manage all of these different end users' access, it can be helpful to just create delegated shortcuts. Because now you only have to worry about permissioning the SPN for each of these different teams. So you care about the Europe data, or you care about the Asia team's data. It doesn't necessarily matter who the individual end users are that are going to be accessing that. You can just set blanket permissions on what these overall teams and their workspaces are able to see. And then they can configure the individual permissions for all of the thousands of end users. So here, the delegated shortcut lets you still control access to your data without being burdened with the overall, all right, how do I manage this user's access or this other fine-grained permission, etc. All right, so let's talk a little bit about APIs. So we'll go through the API details, and then we'll kind of jump over and do the demo and show how some of these things are going to be working in the real example. So we have a whole bunch of APIs for managing OneLake security, and these are now all generally available. The first one is we have two APIs here for managing permissions in bulk. So maybe you want to manage all of your roles in a single API. This is what the get and put APIs are for. So the get API will fetch all of your role definitions from OneLake security, and then the put API will update all of them back to the service. The catch with this API is because it is a bulk, you make the changes to the given roles you want to make, and then you put the whole role payload back. So it's very efficient for updating all of these roles in bulk, but it can be a little more difficult to work with if you only want to change just one role out of 200 or something roles that you might have. So that's why we added the granular role APIs as well. So these three APIs let you get the definition of a single role, create or update that single role, and then delete a single role as needed. So these APIs, again, are now all generally available. We'll give you that flexibility for programmatically managing your roles if you don't want to do it through the UX, or you already have an existing service that kind of deploys roles programmatically. We also have a OneLake security skill for working with your different agents. So agents are obviously very good at working with APIs now as well, but the skill kind of helps provide some of these details for how to use which API to use, especially cover some of the authentication details, how to get your token for calling the APIs, that type of thing. But then this will let you use natural language for updating your roles. So you can just say, hey, what does this role grant users access to? Or I want to give this user access to a specific role. You can then do that through natural language by using the OneLake security skill. And then the other really cool API that we have now in public preview is the ability for any engine or service to integrate with OneLake security. They're using to understand what roles a user has and then apply the security at query time. So you can now use this for any third-party service. So if you want to integrate your own application or agent or data catalog with OneLake security, we now have an API that lets you do this, and then can enforce all that row column level security for those users. So very excited about this. We're working on building out kind of an ecosystem of different apps and services that can integrate natively with OneLake security. So very excited to see that this is now available in preview. All right, so with that, let me pop back over to my browser. We can kind of go through one of the examples for how OneLake security works. And specifically, I want to focus on some of the new engines that are available in preview. All right, so I'm here in my Lakehouse. And I have a whole bunch of tables like I was showing. So you can see I got customers, employees, etc. Now, what I really want to do is give my users the ability to kind of see an end-to-end view of which products, which orders were placed, or which products are associated with orders, which customers are ordering which products, that type of information. So I have a set of kind of 4 core tables here: customers, orders, order details, and products. That contains that information that we want those users to be able to see. So if we click on Manage OneLake Security, you can see here that I have a few roles. So first I'll have the test role that we have created. And then I have this RLS role that I created earlier. And this one has got all of those tables that I was just talking about. So I have orders, I have order details, I have products, I have customers. And you can see I have row level security configured here for my customers table. So you go over here, you can see that this role limits the user's access to customers for only the country of Mexico. So with this role created, I can then have a few other things that I have in my Northwind workspace. So first, I have a Northwind graph. So I'll go through this. I also have a bunch of different endpoints for my Northwind Lakehouse. We have a SQL endpoint, we have an Eventhouse endpoint, and then I have some reports and some other stuff. So if you look at the Northwind graph, I don't know if you've used the Fabric graph item before, but this lets you basically model data from your Lakehouse in a graph format, and then use graph-based queries to do that kind of traversal and relationship stuff that graphs are good for. And these orders are related to certain products that I have here. So this gives me the ability to easily take a look at, this gives me the ability to easily take a look at which orders are being placed by specific customers, etc. Now I'm going to go, now I figured row level security so that only the certain customer country information is going to be shown for my business user. So let's start by going over here to my business user, and we can take a look at the overall Lakehouse. So first, I'm here in my SQL endpoint. Let's start with the Lakehouse view here. So this is the same Northwind Test Lakehouse, but now I'm logged in here as Diego, so I'll be able to see those permissions that were given to me by the admin user. You'll notice I don't have the ability to manage OneLake security because I'm just a viewer. And then you can see I have customers, order details, orders, and products all available here in this Lakehouse. So just the 4 tables that the user was given access to. There's no access to files because I didn't give the user any files access. So let's go over to the SQL endpoint to start. And let's start by running a query. So we'll start with customers. The important thing here is the customer's information is the one that has the row level security on it. So when I run this query, I should only be able to see the rows for my Mexican customers. So you see I get 5 results back. These all have the RLS predicate applied to them. I can go to any of the other tables and run a query as well. Again, these ones don't have RLS. So we'll just see all of the different rows here. So you can see I've got a whole bunch of different information here applied in my orders table. But the important thing is I can see the customers table with the RLS applied, and then I can see the products table and all the other tables that I might need to have access to. So let's start by going over to our graph. So I can see the same graph here that the user, that the admin was able to see. So customers, placed their order, ordered products, etc. But I want to understand what products are being ordered by the customers. So what I'll do is I'll create a new graph query. I have a graph query over here. What this is doing is it's traversing the graph from customers to products, and then it'll give me all of the information that I'm interested in here. So who is the customer, what is their country, what order did they place, and then what products are they ordering. So I can now run this graph query, and because graph works with OneLake security, instead of getting some sort of query error or something like that, where OneLake is doing that enforce permission safely, it's still enforcing the permission safely, except now I'm going to be able to see just the rows for Mexico and the product names that are associated with that. So you can see what my customers are ordering. They're ordering lots of different food items, and like we would expect, only the customer country of Mexico results are returned here. It's a very cool feature. Now we can model all of our data in the graph database and then be able to query it using the graph engine. So we've queried the data in SQL endpoint. We've queried the data in graph now, which is brand new. And I can also do the same thing in our Eventhouse endpoint. So we actually made using Eventhouse a lot easier. So if you go to your Lakehouse now, there's just an option to go directly to your Eventhouse endpoint. So instead of having to create a separate Eventhouse item, you can just say, actually, I just want an Eventhouse endpoint for real-time analytics. I just want to do this natively over my Lakehouse. So I can do that, and you can see it pulls over all the same shortcut tables into the Lakehouse. And I have the same orders, customer ID, etc. So now I'm going to do basically the same thing that I was just doing in graph. So let's join these tables together. I want to see what product names are being ordered by my customers here in the Eventhouse table. So we'll run the same query in KQL. So exact same results that we were expecting in the graph database. So you can see I only see country Mexico. I see the exact same product names. So RLS is working here just like it was in the in the graph engine. So the important thing to note is the graph integration is GA, Eventhouse integration is public preview. You get on my my data there, and then I can use any of these different query engines inside of Fabric. So we can use Eventhouse, we can use Graph, we can use SQL Analytics Endpoint, and you get that consistent view of security across all of these different views of the product. There was a comment in the chat, so I will point that out. So yeah, when you create your SQL Analytics Endpoint, let me go to that. SQL Analytics Endpoint can run it. So just like we have kind of pass-through and delegated shortcuts, the SQL engine also supports a delegated and a pass-through mode as well. So if you go to the data access mode settings, you'll see that there are two options here. So user's identity mode is the pass-through mode. So if you want to make sure that your users who are querying SQL endpoint see exactly what their OneLake security roles are, that's where you can use user's identity mode. If you want to delegate the permissions to the SQL endpoint, maybe you want your users in the SQL endpoint to see a subset of the data, or you want to do that kind of delegation so you don't have to manage their permissions individually, you can do that through setting it into delegated identity mode. Currently, when you create a new item, it defaults to delegated mode, and you'll switch it to user's identity mode. We're working on updating the default, so it'll be user's identity mode for new items. That should be available here fairly soon. So important thing, if you are not seeing, if the end user is not seeing exactly what you expect them to see, make sure to check the mode in the SQL endpoint, because sometimes it'll be delegated identity mode. And again, that means they're seeing whatever the owner of the lake house is. So that is the delegated identity that's being used. And actually, if you put it in delegated mode, it will tell you who the delegated identity is down here in this page. So you can also always restrict the delegated identity's access if you want to control the superset of permissions that are available in the SQL Analytics endpoint. So we've shown SQL queries, we've shown the Eventhouse queries, we've shown graph queries. So any of these things for OneLake security, you're now going to get that consistent RLS and CLS enforcement. So we can do the same thing here with column level security as well. So if we go to the customers table, we can set some column level security. We'll enable it. Now let's say we actually don't want users to be able to see the individual. Let's go with the company name. It'll take just a minute to update. So one thing that you can do is in your SQL endpoint, actually, let me go here to refresh it. In the SQL endpoint, you can always check the status of the updated roles by going to the security folder and then looking in this DB roles custom folder. So in here, you'll see a bunch of roles that start with OLS underscore, so OneLake security. And these are the different roles that exist within the SQL endpoint. And these are the ones that are synchronized from OneLake security. So if you add a new role and you go to the SQL endpoint and you don't see it, you can just click refresh, and then that role will show up and then immediately start taking effect for all those querying users. So with the column level security now in place, if I go back to Delegated and I run this query, we'll now expect an error. So it says, yep, you can't query this table. You do not have access to the company name. So I can go here, edit my query, remove the company name column, rerun it. And now those users, and now the rest of the query runs like we would expect. So again, we have just RLS applying, and you have the CLS applying, etc. There's a question in the chat. If I have workspace admin role, is it possible to set the OneLake permissions, I'm assuming? Or do I need to be a portal admin? Yeah, so the permissions are set on each workspace. So if I go back to my workspace page, so any of these users here that are members or admins are able to configure the OneLake security permissions on a given item. So the users here that are viewers, they are not able to configure OneLake security permissions. And the necessary permissions are write and reshare. So if I go to my Northwind Test Lakehouse and I click Manage Permissions, you can see how the actual user then gets mapped to the underlying permissions. So you can have read, write, reshare. So any user with write and reshare is then able to manage the permissions here. You can also set OneLake security from this view as well. So if you don't want to actually click into the item, you just want to manage your item from this manage permissions page. All right. So the last thing that I want to show is the OneLake catalog. So I think there was another live stream that kind of did, or is either upcoming, that's going to talk a little bit more about the OneLake catalog. But there's some specific OneLake security features that we're working on putting in the OneLake catalog. The goal of the catalog is see all of the items that you have access to, discover items that you can request access to. So those are like the endorsed items. And then also be able to govern and manage access for those items as well. So Explore tab here is focused mostly on, again, exploring items that you might have access to. So you can see I have, I'm in the admin right now. So in the admin view, you see a whole bunch of different items, some of who they're created by. You can click on them to get more details. We also now have descriptions on items. So you can add descriptions to an item to help customers discover exactly what this item is for, why they would use this sales reporting semantic model over a different semantic model, etc. And then we also have the Govern tab and the Secure tab. Now, the first thing that we did here was on the Explore tab, we have added the same permissions page that I was just showing. So first, you have the direct access for setting item permissions. You can add new users. Then we've also added the OneLake security page here as well. I have my test role. I have my RLS role. I can click on it. I can see what the specific items are inside this role. I can edit the data if I want to change what those individual permissions are. I can see the members. See Diego and Niha are my two users. So the full experience for managing the OneLake security roles, but I didn't have to go to the item itself. I just found it in the catalog. I was doing some other tasks, and then I can manage the permissions there. The Govern tab here, I'm not going to go into in too much detail, but this is for more like governance, what type of security network settings, what type of purview, labels, sensitivity labels, governance policies do I have on those particular items. So that's what the Govern tab is for. I'm going to go over here to the Secure tab. The Secure tab is for managing your actual security to these individual items. So there's two views. There's View Users, which will show you, the first thing that you'll do is pick the different scope of workspaces that you want to include. So I'm usually using Northwind. We can use Prod One. We can use Zava Central. And as I select workspaces, it'll then pull in all of my different users that have access. So you can see, this is my Dataworks test, is my admin. They have permission to 4 of these different workspaces. Diego down here is a viewer of just 2 of the workspaces, etc. Now, the thing that we've just added is the ability to add or remove users across multiple workspaces from a single control. So previously, if you wanted to do this, you would go to a workspace, you would click Manage Access, you would have to add a user to that workspace, and you go to another workspace, and you repeat those tasks. With this new feature, you can now click Add Users, pick all the workspaces that you want to grant the user to. So we'll grant access to Dev, and then we'll grant access to reporting. And then we'll grant Patrick access to both of these different workspaces. And not only can you grant just a single user, but you can actually grant multiple users access to these workspaces as well. So I now have multiple workspaces, I have multiple users, and I can say I want these users to be a contributor here. And then it will update those permissions for all of those users. Happy with the decision that I just made. I can now say, actually, I don't want those users to have those permissions anymore. So we go to Cardoso reporting, we go to dev, we'll grab Patrick, we'll grab Niha, and we'll put them back to viewers, click update. And again, we can update their permissions in bulk. So very easy to manage all of your workspace permissions across all of your different users from a single location without having to go to each workspace. The second tab here is then View Security Roles. So similar to the function of View Users, I can see all of my OneLake security roles across multiple workspaces, across multiple items. So OneLake security is supported on a whole range of different items right now. So we support Lakehouse, we support mirrored Dataworks catalog, we support all mirrored databases, and then there's a little bit of a newer thing called mirrored catalogs. So it lets you mirror other Iceberg catalogs. So Dremio and a few other types are available. All of those have OneLake security support. But the roles live within the individual item themselves. So if you don't want to click around to every item, that's what you can use the Secure tab for. So you can see here I have some mirror databases, and all I can do is just click on this one, and then it'll show me the individual roles. So the key thing here is this is actually listing all of the roles, not the lakehouse. So here I have default reader, and this is in this particular item. Here I have this. So I can also go to like my Java database. And then once you click on a particular role, then you can edit that particular role. So instead of taking me just to the role overview page, it takes me to that specific role. I can see the definition of the role. I can view the row or column level security. So this one has row level security applied. I can see what the definition of it is. We can go back up. We can view our members. So full role level, full OneLake security experience here in the OneLake catalog across all of your different item types. Once you have selected an item or a particular role here, you're then in the context of that data item. So Java DB. I can then either duplicate the role, delete the role, or create a new role directly in line. Exact same like we saw in the demo at the beginning, but it'll create the item. We have the open button, just takes you directly out to the Java database. You can manage it that way. So very excited about kind of the improvements we're making to the OneLake catalog. It gives you that view of who are my users, what data do I have, and then once you understand your data, you can then manage the permissions for those particular users to grant access to it. Awesome. So with questions, I'm happy to answer those. There are a few in the chat around single endpoint and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm here for a few minutes to answer questions. Otherwise, we can wrap it up a little early, and then I believe any other questions afterwards can just be posted in the video, and we'll take a look at those to make sure that they still get answered. Awesome. Well, I've not seen any questions come through at the moment, but again, please feel free to question. Possible to use these view security roles using notebooks. You can through the APIs. So if you you can pull them in. I have lots of customers that just programmatically manage their roles that way by using Notebook. Again, you can also use a lot of agents now. You can either use the OneLake security skill, which is part of the overall Fabric skills for doing this. Most agents are pretty good with just understanding the public documentation on the APIs now. So you can also just take a look at it that way. If you want to have your agent give you updates on how your roles have changed, or even recommend updates you can make to your roles, that's all possible through the OneLake security APIs. Any other questions that anyone has? Yeah, and if you have any feedback or comments on OneLake security, or you just have general questions, I do monitor the Fabric subreddit fairly closely. So if you have questions, and actually the overall community on the Fabric subreddit is very great. I believe it's just r/Microsoft Fabric. Leave comments, ask questions. It's a great community. People will jump in and help. Make sure you get the answers that you need. Cool. Any last questions? We have just a minute. Awesome. I really appreciate that. I always love all the feedback and engagement, and looking forward to staying in touch on another Reactor video.
Thank you all for joining, and thanks again to our speakers. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find our survey link on the screen or in the chat. And we'll see you at the next one.